My name is Dane Craig. I'm with Vacation Races, and we are really excited to have Shannon from Gnarly conducting this webinar. Shannon is the Chief Product Officer over at Gnarly, or as she's affectionately called over there, the head nutrition nerd. And so Shannon's going to talk to us today all about nutrition. I know a lot of times as runners, we're so focused on the physical aspect of running, right? Like our training, how our training's going and how we're getting faster and stronger and how that's impacting our bodies and our times. And but just as important as the miles we put in is the nutrition, right? And that's what Shannon's going to talk to us all about, how nutrition can impact our workouts and then also our recoveries and everything in between. So yeah, so we're excited to have Gnarly hosting these for us, and I'm going to just hand it over to Shannon and get out of her way. And she'll be joined a little bit later by Trevor, who's a super ultra runner, who I believe is going to be talking a little bit about some of the science that Shannon's going to be talking about, and then kind of his experience, running and competing in events, and how the two worlds of the science and the practical are interacting with each other. So Shannon, why don't you take it away?
Sure. Yeah. I'm going to provide a lot of the background, and then although I've run ultras myself, I think you guys probably want to hear from Trevor, who's had a lot of success. He's won the Wasatch 100. He's won the Hurt 100. He most recently set the FKT on the White Rim Trail down in Moab. So, and he's been a vegan for I think over a decade. So he's got a lot. Because of that, has to pay a lot of attention to his nutrition, got a lot of really good information to share about what he does specifically. So he'll jump in at about 12:30 and share that. So speaking of sharing, I am going to try to share my screen, and hopefully this goes well. Share. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see that. I'm calling this full spectrum run nutrition because I really want to talk not just about what you should do nutritionally while you're running, but also about what you should think about before and after, and how fuel use and energy system use kind of mixes into the decisions we make about fueling in those periods. So just to give you a brief overview, I'm going to start by talking about energy systems and fuel use. Then I'm going to break into pre-run nutrition, during run nutrition, and post-run nutrition. And around that time is when Trevor will jump in and he can tell you specifically what he does and some of his race experiences. Okay, so let's start with energy systems and fuel use. This is one of my favorite quotes generally about fueling for ultras and fueling for running as a whole. So running is an eating contest on the go. And as Dane pointed out, oftentimes we can get so caught up in maybe what our build schedule looks like up to a race, or whether we're getting in hill work or we're doing track workouts, and we kind of forget that really getting our nutrition dialed and what we're going to do before we run and during our run, and then what we do after to recover and turn around quickly can be just as important. Because if we don't pay attention to those parts, it doesn't matter how good your training is. You're not going to be able to capitalize on that training because you're going to be in the hole nutritionally. So let's first start by talking about the energy systems that running uses. I always like to throw a little bit of science in because it's easy to tell you to eat one thing or another. But what I really want people to do is understand those recommendations, because I think then you're more likely to integrate them into your own training program if you understand where they're coming from. So the main energy system in the main energy currency in our bodies is called ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. This is a really crude diagram of ATP, but I think it gets the point across. That brown blob with the 3 yellow circles attached. So that brown blob is adenosine, and those 3 circles are phosphate molecules. That's where the triphosphate comes into play. And you can think about ATP as this charge battery. in each of those phosphate bonds that connects those phosphate molecules, there's a ton of energy. And when one of those phosphate molecules pops off, we get this release of energy. And it's that conversion from ATP to ADP, which is diphosphate, so only two phosphates, we get a release of energy. And it's a cycle, so you can add another phosphate back on to recharge the battery. But this is how a lot of work gets done in our body. And there are a number of energy systems that we can use to generate ATP. The creatine phosphate system, anaerobic glycolysis, which uses carbohydrates, and aerobic glycolysis, which can use carbohydrates or fats. And I'm going to talk a little bit about these last two. Creatine phosphate is important really for all exercise, even though it's often associated with creatine supplementation, which people only think is for bodybuilders. There's more and more research that more aerobic activities can also benefit from creatine supplementation, but we can talk about that at another time. Today, I want to put all of those energy systems kind of in the context of intensity and effort when we run. So running is primarily an aerobic activity. And what that means is that we can meet most of our energy demands aerobically, which means with the oxygen that our bodies are taking in. In this graph that you see, we've got exercise intensity on the x-axis, so going from 0% to really high intensity at 100%, and then we have ATP needs on the y-axis. And you're going to see all these colors overlapping. That's really what I want you to pay attention to, is they're overlapping. They're not kind of in a timeline where you have aerobic metabolism and then that shuts off, and then anaerobic metabolism and that shuts off, and then creatine phosphate. Kind of everything is happening at once. And you might see the predominance of aerobic metabolism at lower intensities, but you still see some anaerobic metabolism in there too. And that's true at high intensities too. Even though we're at 80–90% intensity, you still see aerobic metabolism in there. So all of these are kind of happening at the same time. But at very low intensities, we see mostly aerobic metabolism. And fat serves as the primary fuel at these low intensities. And as we increase in intensity level, we see carbohydrates becoming important as well. And this is really because during anaerobic energy metabolism, we can't use fat. So as intensity increases and we get closer to that anaerobic threshold, we see carbohydrates become more important because we're not able to meet all of our energy demands by taking in oxygen. We've reached our VO2 max. And so you see anaerobic metabolism start becoming more important. And because we can't burn fats anaerobically, carbohydrates become even more important. So as we get to really high intensities, we see carbohydrates become really important because fat is not an option as a fuel. So it's important to note that the kind of ratio of fat to carbs burned at these lower intensities is really dependent on diet. So the amount of fat in your diet can determine how much or whether or not you use a ton of fat as a fuel. And then also on training, we can do like fat adaptation training, things like long, slow distance, fasted training. These are all tools, training tools people use to get their bodies to burn fat as a fuel a little bit more. But that's also not what we're going to talk about today. I just wanted you guys to understand that really both fat and carbohydrate at these kind of moderate to lower intensities are important fuels. So let's talk a little bit about carbohydrates first. So glycogen is our body's storage form of carbohydrates. We store glycogen in our liver and in our muscles. And liver glycogen is really important for maintaining blood glucose, while muscle glycogen is really what supplies that energy during muscle contraction. So what feeds into anaerobic glycolysis, what feeds into aerobic glycolysis. So our body stores enough glycogen to fuel about 60 to 90 minutes of exercise. Now, this is assuming that you're not on a low carbohydrate diet. That would obviously be different because your glycogen stores would be lower, but you're eating kind of a normal everyday diet. You should have enough liver glycogen and enough muscle glycogen to fuel about that much exercise without having to take in carbohydrates from extra food. it's important to make a distinction between the different types of carbohydrates, right? And an easy way to do that is by looking at glycemic index. So in this graph, we're showing time in hours on the x-axis, and we have blood glucose levels on the y-axis. And what glycemic index is a measure of is it's really how fast our body metabolizes a particular carbohydrate, and then we see a rise in blood glucose levels because of that carbohydrate. So high glycemic index foods metabolize really quickly, and we see a significant quick and high rise in blood glucose. Lower glycemic index foods, which is indicated by the green line as opposed to the red line, the green line, we have a much lower increase in blood glucose, and it's usually drawn out over a longer period of time. So high glycemic index foods are typically foods that are very processed, but often, you know, fruit falls into that category as well. Lower glycemic index foods tends to be things that are higher in fiber, things like vegetables, whole grains, but then we also have some fruit that fall into that category. So often you hear people demonize high glycemic index foods and, you know, put low glycemic index foods on a pedestal. And you know, you could make some general assumptions based on this graph about that. I myself, you know, think cookies are important for the soul, even though they might not be the highest nutritional quality. But both high glycemic index foods and low glycemic index foods play an important role in fueling as an athlete. And that's what we're going to talk about right now. So high glycemic index foods, or simple carbohydrates, because they're able to elevate blood sugar so quickly, they are our friends around exercise when you time them around training. So before and during, high glycemic index foods keep blood glucose elevated, and after training, they replenish spent glycogen and really help with recovery. Low glycemic index foods also play an important role. Those are typically complex carbs, like we talked about, and they're important throughout the day. They are typically high nutritional quality, so they have lots of vitamins and minerals. Those micronutrients and fiber are important for general health, but they also help keep our glycogen stores stocked. And so they're important to include at meals. So both high glycemic index foods and low glycemic index foods can play a role in fueling your running. So we talked a little bit about fat, and fat can be an important fuel too, but I'm going to put an asterisk next to that, and I want to qualify that statement. So at 9 calories per gram, fat is an efficient way to get in calories. So it's, you know, over double the calories per gram that we see in carbohydrate, which is only 4 calories per gram. So you're getting a more calorically dense macronutrient. But I will say this, and I'm not talking here about ketosis or anything like that. That is a whole different subject. What I'm talking purely about is using fat in aerobic metabolism and using it as a fuel when running. So even the leanest athlete has plenty of fat already on board. So we store fat in our muscles. There's actually tons of research showing that endurance athletes and highly trained endurance athletes store a ton of fat in their muscles. They're called intramuscular triglycerides. And those intramuscular triglycerides are what then helps to serve as a fuel to our muscles while running. Fats are also slower to digest than carbohydrates. So when you're taking in fat as opposed to using fat that you already have stored in your body, it takes a long time for that fat to digest and then for your body to be able to use it as energy. Fat also requires more oxygen to make ATP, and that is because the fatty acids that are part of the fat molecule don't inherently contain oxygen. This is why they can't be used in anaerobic metabolism. So it takes extra oxygen to use them in aerobic metabolism to make ATP. We already talked about how they're not helpful at higher intensities. And so it's important to know what intensity you're running at and therefore whether or not fat makes sense. Now for longer efforts, they definitely can make a ton of sense. They shouldn't be your primary fuel source. Carbohydrates should still be what you're focusing on, but some can be helpful. They can settle your stomach. And like we said, it's a way to get in a lot of calories, maybe a little bit more quickly. Okay, so now let's take some of what I talked about, as far as pre-run, or as far as fuel source and energy systems. And let's talk about pre-run nutrition. So what do I eat before my race or run? So I'm going to start with this kind of like pre-breakfast, 2 to 3 hours before start time. So the goal of this meal is to restock your glycogen. This is particularly important if your race is in the morning, because of the overnight fast. So you're clearly, unless you're a sleepwalker, or like me, gets up in the middle of the night a lot, you're not necessarily eating overnight. And so your liver glycogen stores usually are depleted. And so you only have that muscle glycogen to use during your run. And so if you can restock that glycogen and bring your liver glycogen stores up, you're going to be starting your race in a better place. And so this is what that meal is about. 2 to 3 hours gives you enough time to digest the slower digesting carbohydrates and restock that liver glycogen. So this meal should be mostly carbohydrates and some protein. 75 to 100 grams of carbs is a good place to start. That's about 300 to 400 calories. You want to avoid too much fat and fiber. The reason is because they take a longer time to digest. So if you were going to push this meal out to 3 to 4 hours, that wouldn't be something that you'd have to worry about as much. But if we're in the 2 to 3 hour range, try to decrease the fat levels. Some fat is fine, and try to decrease the fiber levels. Water and electrolytes is also important, 12 to 24 ounces, because you want to start the race hydrated. So we always talk also about, most of us, these races, they're starting in the morning, they're starting at 6 a.m. Should you really get up at 3 to 4 a.m. to have this meal? It's a very athlete dependent question. Trevor, I think when he jumps on, will tell you that he actually does get up, at 3, 4 in the morning to have this meal, and he can talk to you about what he consumes, because he feels better starting the race fueled. If I'm sleeping, I like to stay asleep, and then I'll have kind of the smaller meal that we're going to talk about on the next slide, and I feel okay. But it really depends on the person. I think something to play with, potentially something to try on your longer training runs. I know it would be painful to get up on a weekend that early, but it might be worth doing once or twice and seeing how you feel one versus the other, and whether or not more sleep makes more sense for starting your race, or starting with an early meal makes more sense. So now let's talk about kind of immediate pre-run nutrition. So about 60 minutes before the start time. The goal of this is to really top off your blood glucose and to stay hydrated. So at this point, you really want these simple carbohydrates. This is what we were talking about with simple carbs being our friend right around efforts. 25 to 30 grams, that's 100 to 120 calories. That is a great amount for your body to, digest quickly, for it to get into your bloodstream. You want water and electrolytes as well, 12 to 24 ounces. Branched chain amino acids is another option here, particularly if your race is in the morning, because you haven't had protein in the last few hours, depending on what that meal looked like for you 3 hours out. Having branched chain amino acids before your run in your system while you're running can really set you up for better recovery, because BCAAs help reduce the amount of muscle protein breakdown that's going on during your run. And in that reduction, you will optimize recovery if you also then follow up with the protein after. So that could be another option to consider right before. Okay, so let's talk now about during run nutrition. So what do I eat while I'm running? I'm gonna divide this into hydration guidelines and then talk about nutritional strategies. So for hydration, the first thing we need to consider is how much fluid we really need to replace. That's really dependent on how much sweat you lose. And the easiest way to determine that is a sweat test. So factors like effort, temperature, humidity, clothing type, fluid status, all these things can affect the amount of sweat you're going to lose. And so obviously where you're training, the temperature, the humidity, the season, the clothing you're wearing, these things could change from throughout your training for a particular race, but then also where you live versus where your race is occurring. So take that into consideration. If you live on the East Coast and it's super humid and your race is going to be, you know, in Utah where it's super arid, then realize these results are change. And as soon as you can do a sweat test in a place where humidity is not an issue, it might be worthwhile because the results are going to be different. But to do a sweat test, super simple. You weigh yourself before you're running. This weight should be naked because obviously your clothes have an impact. And if you sweat in your clothes, that's going to affect your results. Then you put your clothes back on. I didn't put that step in there, but it's an important one to note. Your neighbors don't want you running naked. You run for 1 hour and note how many ounces of fluid you drink. You might not drink anything at all, but if you do drink any water, take note of that, exactly how many ounces. Then weigh yourself after running. So this weight should also be naked. And you're going to subtract your post-run weight from your pre-run weight. So if you lose 1 pound, 1 pound is approximately equal to 16 ounces of fluid. So then you're going to add the ounces lost in sweat to the ounces that you consume to get the approximate amount of fluid ounces per hour you should be drinking. So we're going to go through an example because I know that's a lot. So if your pre-run weight is 130 pounds, and during that hour of running, you consume 8 ounces of water, and then your post-run weight is 129 pounds. So you lost 1 pound between your pre-run and post-run. That 1 pound is approximately equal to 16 ounces. Then we're going to add in the 8 ounces consumed while running. So 16 plus 8 is 24. So that's 24 ounces per hour that you should be replacing. You want to aim actually for 80 to 90% of this number, not 100%. 80 to 90% is a great goal. A lot of research showing that kind of puts you at the perfect place without overhydrating or potentially getting into, you know, dangerous levels of diluting electrolytes and things of that matter. But we're going to talk about electrolytes next. So 80 to 90% of your sweat tests, do sweat tests often. They can change with effort as well. So as your fitness increases and you might not be working as hard, this will also affect the results. Okay, so what about electrolytes? It's also an important part of hydration. So I know there are a lot of tests out there now where you can send in samples of your sweat and get an idea of the amount of sodium you lose in sweat. That's a great idea to do. You can also just start at a number and play around with it and see how you feel. So the average amount of sweat lost across, you know, pretty big group of people is about 500 milligrams of sodium per pound, about 16 ounces. And it can range from 220 to 1100 milligrams. So there's a huge range there. And that range can be dependent on genetics. It can be dependent upon diet. So whether or not you include a lot of salt in your diet, or maybe you limit sodium for other reasons. It can be dependent on temperature and humidity. And it can also be dependent on how acclimated you are to the conditions that you're running in. So I usually recommend that people start with about 300 to 500 milligrams of sodium per hour. And this is through both fluids and foods. So paying attention to, you know, the electrolytes, potentially you're getting an electrolyte replacement drink, thinking also about any electrolytes that are in any gels or salted potatoes or anything you're eating like that. And then even if you're using electrolyte tabs, these all count towards that number. So Gnarly Hydrate, we include at races. If you run races through vacation races that are less than a marathon, you'll see Gnarly Hydrate on course. It has 250 milligrams of sodium per 12 to 16 ounce serving. So you'd be in that 500 milligram range if you were consuming, you know, 1.5 to 2 servings plus other food per hour. It also has the electrolytes magnesium, potassium, calcium, and chloride, which can be important for sure. But the main thing to pay attention to in any electrolyte replacement you use is the sodium, because that's primarily what you lose in sweat. Gnarly Hydrate also has B vitamins, which are important for energy metabolism in athletes, and B vitamins are typically lower in athletes, so important to replace. It has some sugar for effective hydration, because sugar actually helps actively push water into our bodies via the sodium glucose pump, but it doesn't have enough that gut rot or digestive issues becomes a concern. It's really easy to drink. So if you haven't tried it at vacation races, come to gonarly.com and get some sample packs. It's pretty delicious, and we're about to release a third flavor next week. So we'll talk about longer races in a minute, but nutrition wise, if you're running 90 minutes or less, light fueling could be considered, but it might not be necessary. As you remember, or hopefully you remember when we talked about glycogen stores, if you start fueled, you have enough glycogen on board for about 60 to 90 minutes of running. And how fast you go through those stores really depends on your effort level and your fitness. So closer to 90 minutes, maybe consider taking in some calories. Closer to 60 minutes might not be necessary, but that's really something for you to determine. And then at this point, if you're running 90 minutes or less, you can really use thirst as an indication of when you need to drink. If we're getting over 90 minutes to longer races in the 2-hour range, or even in ultras, this is when having a nutrition and hydration strategy can be really helpful. You do not want to be in the hole, either in terms of nutrition, in terms of hydration, or in terms of electrolyte intake. So you want to start early and you want to be consistent. I typically recommend starting if you haven't had a nutrition strategy before. And when I say that, that's like some set amount of calories that you're taking in on a regular basis. I start people off in the 160 to 200 calorie range. Ideally, we want to get that number much higher, closer to 300, potentially even 350 calories. Most research shows that people can't really take in more than 400 calories per hour. And even at that 400 calories, we're at a deficit for caloric intake versus the calories we're burning. And that's why we want to really maximize our caloric intake, or maximize our body's ability to use energy that we already have on board, like fat stores. So that 160 to 300 calorie range is about 40 to 75 grams of simple carbohydrates per hour. We talked about the sweat rate test. So hydration wise, for hydration strategy, you want to aim for 80 to 90% of those sweat rate results, and then about 300 to 500 milligrams of sodium per hour. All of these things should be things that you're playing with on your training runs. So if this is going to be your nutrition strategy for your race, this should be your nutrition strategy for your long runs. And you should practice it, and you should fine tune it. You should find the foods that work, the foods that don't work, what is not enough calories, what is too much calories, what is not enough water, what is too much water. Everybody is different. And so you really have to figure out what's going to work for you. So I've seen this tip a ton of places, but I always think it's worth mentioning. It's easy to forget to eat or drink, especially because often during these runs, you don't feel like it. So set your watch or timer for a regular interval, like 15 or 20 minutes, as a reminder to eat and drink, and practice during your long runs with that as well. So let's now talk about Gnarly's new product, Gnarly Fuel 2.0. This kind of combines the nutrition and the hydration and the electrolytes. And this will be at vacation races, events that are longer than a marathon. So Fuel 2.0 is a little different. In Hydrate, there are some similarities, but it's different in that it includes that carbohydrate source. So 100 calories or 25 grams of carbohydrate per 12 ounces. And this comes from easy to digest carbs, glucose, and sucrose. So by including 2 different carbohydrates, we're using 2 different carbohydrate transporters in the gut, which allows you to potentially get in higher carbohydrate intake than you would be able to if you were just using one carb. So that's why we use both. It has 250 milligrams of sodium per 12 ounces. And so 100 calories, 25 grams, that's not enough if you're running over 90 minutes. but 12 ounces is also not enough. So likely if you're doing runs that are 2 hours or longer, you're going to be taking in 2 servings of Fuel 2O per hour, which gets you about 200 calories and 500 milligrams of sodium, and 24 ounces of fluid. So that gets you in about where you want to be, and then potentially taking in more calories from food as needed. So it also has the electrolytes, magnesium, potassium, calcium, and chloride. And then really a big differentiator of Fuel 2O is the inclusion of something called HMB, which stands for hydroxymethylbutyrate. HMB is a metabolite of the branched chain amino acid leucine. So as I mentioned earlier, when we were talking about that pre-run nutrition, incorporating branched chain amino acids in your pre-run nutrition can be great because having BCAAs in your system helps reduce muscle protein breakdown, which helps with recovery later. Well, so now, including HMB in Gnarly Fuel 2O, you get this IV, drip of BCAAs in your system while you're running. And there's a ton of research showing that HMB can really help with recovery and soreness. So it will help with that post-race turnaround so you're ready for your next race. So now let's talk about post-run nutrition. So there's a lot out there about how, do I need to get it in within the first 30 minutes? Is an hour okay? Is later okay? And, what I kind of generally say is as soon as possible. I think getting it in within, an hour is ideal. If you get it in within 2 hours, it's, it's not the end of the world. But I think closer to your race, you're going to get more effective glycogen replenishment, which is going to make you feel better post-run. So the goal of this meal is really to replenish glycogen stores. It's to kickstart muscle repair and synthesis, and it's to hydrate. So you want ratio of 1:3 or 1:4 protein to simple carbs. So that could look at like 15 to 20 grams of protein and 60 to 80 grams of carbs. I really want us to be in that 15 to 20 grams of protein range, because that has kind of the optimal level of amino acids, particularly branched chain amino acids, to kickstart muscle protein synthesis and really help with repair and recovery. And so then if we take that 15 to 20 grams and we look at the 3 to 4 times greater carbohydrate intake, that puts us at 60 to 80 grams. So you want 16 to 18 ounces of fluid with electrolytes. Oftentimes, if we're training, and doing longer runs, when we are done, we might have a drive back. It might be a little longer before we can get real food in. This is when supplements are helpful. That's why they're called supplements, because it's supplemental nutrition. So if you know you're going to be away from your house, if you know you don't have access to fresh food, put a protein shake and a banana in your car and just have it accessible so that you don't skip on this meal that can really help you feel better the next day. It's especially important for 2-a-days, or if you're doing back-to-back long runs preparing for an ultra. Okay, so that is pretty much everything that I had to say. I think I heard Trevor jump on, and so I'm going to turn it over to him. Hey, Trevor. Trevor, will you just go through and kind of take us through what you do pre-run, during run, and post-run as far as nutrition? And then love to hear, I will say Trevor was integral in Gnarly's formulation of Fuel 2O. He was my guinea pig, and we played with lots of different formulations. So Trevor has a lot of experience with Fuel 2O, and I'd love you to kind of tell everybody about that as well.
Yeah. Hi, sorry if it's a little loud. I'm outside at work here, so a little breezy. Pre-run, I think Shannon pretty much nailed everything that I try to do. At least I, make an effort to accomplish with my nutrition. Pre-run, usually it kind of depends on the day or what the event is, but I usually aim for pretty small meal before a run, pretty carb heavy, usually like a bagel with a little bit of peanut butter or something on it, maybe a banana. So I'm getting the carbs and stuff in. Keep it pretty light, maybe like half a cup of coffee or something, trying to do stuff that doesn't upset my stomach too much, but also gives me the energy I need. Now I got a jet going over, so sorry if you can hear that. Can wait a second if it's too loud. I'm right by the airport, so.
I can't even hear it, Trevor, so I think you're
Oh,
good.
okay, perfect. Yeah, and then during a run, you know, I know Shannon touched on this. I try to keep it pretty simple for anything 90 minutes or under. I usually don't bring any calories for anything like that. Even up to 2 hours, usually. I usually don't bring any calories. And I kind of just drink water to my whatever my thirst level is. You know, as it gets hotter, I've found bringing electrolytes and things like that are pretty important, even on the runs, you know, 90 minutes to 2 hours. For me, I feel like I just perform better if I'm replenishing those as well. And then anything over 2 hours, I try to consume about, you know, roughly 200 to 300 calories an hour if I can. And usually that comes in pretty low doses at a time. I'm either sipping on this new product, Fuel 2.0, or just snacking on little bits of pretzels or things like that at a time as I go. I don't do much with gels or anything anymore. I've found that I like a combination of solid food plus liquid nutrition. So, and then post run, yeah, nailed it as well. I always do a protein shake and a banana if I'm not eating a meal right after. That's like my go-to, because that gives me the 20 grams of protein and enough carbs to kickstart that recovery. So that's pretty much, yeah, what I do. Pretty basic.
Trevor, can you talk about Fuel 2.0 and kind of where that comes in and your experience with that?
Yeah. So it's been a real pleasure to be the guinea pig on this product, because I think it's just super amazing stuff. It's really been a game changer for me. I've tried other, you know, liquid nutrition type things from other brands, and they either don't taste very good or you kind of get sick of the flavor. Or for me, they've come with other sort of GI issues and just haven't worked out too well, or there's not enough sodium or anything like that. So, but with this stuff, it just seems to have the perfect balance of everything you need, especially my body, and especially for trying to run fast and having harder efforts. I've used it at Hurt in 2020. Yeah, it was 2020, and also on an attempt at FKT on the White Rim Trail, which is 100 miles as well. And for both those, it was effectively my sole nutrition for the entire day. I did supplement with, like, you know, just some solid foods at aid stations and things like that, but for the most part, I used that specifically, and I never had any lows throughout the day. My electrolyte balances were all like perfect all day. It just felt great. It's really hard to oversell how good this product is and how well it's treated me. So I'm super stoked for it to be released, and yeah, I think you guys will all really enjoy it as well. So
awesome. Thanks, Trevor.
yeah.
So we're going to start answering some questions. You are free to ask me questions if you have questions specifically for Trevor too. Maybe just you know, say for Trevor, or, you know, we can both take a shot at answering any questions that are in there. So I'm going to pull up. Okay, can you provide examples of food for these meals, specifically branched chain amino acids? So yeah, I think Trevor gave a great example for the pre-run nutrition. So a bagel with some almond butter, you can put some banana on that, you know, so through the bagel and the banana, you're getting carbohydrates, you get a little bit of protein and a little bit of fat from the nut butter, but not too much. So, you know, something like that. You could have some oatmeal with some banana. So you're getting good source of carbs. You're getting a little bit of fiber from the oatmeal, but once again, not a ton. You could add some protein powder to that, so you're getting a little bit of protein. In the protein, that's where you get the branched chain amino acids. I was specifically talking about a BCAA supplement in the 60 minutes beforehand. But if you are able to get in a good source of protein, maybe 3 to 4 hours in advance, you might not need that BCAA supplement beforehand. It's just how your body handles that much protein. To get an equivalent amount, you'd have to be in the 15 to 20 gram range, which I tend to tell people not to consume that much protein right before a run. We should really be working on trying to get in those carbohydrates at that point. So I was specifically talking about a standalone BCAA supplement in the 60 minutes prior. For the pre-run, like directly before 60 minutes, that's where something like fresh fruit becomes great. Some people who might enjoy goos or quick energy like that, that's an option. I think a goo tends to be about 100 calories or 25 grams. Untapped maple, Muir energy, they all make great, more natural, gels that have quick, accessible energy in them. You can also just have a banana. You can have, anything like that that's going to be easy to digest. Some people like graham crackers actually right before they run. That's another example. So those would all be the simple carbohydrates, 25 to 30 grams you're trying to get 60 minutes beforehand. And then the post-run nutrition, protein shake is great with a banana. That's a quick and easy one. You can have any meal that you would make at home. Would be good. Like food first is kind of what we believe in at Gnarly, and I think a lot of you do as well. And so if you have the opportunity to have a meal, just make sure you're getting in that 15 to 20 grams of protein and then some good carbohydrates from easy to digest carbs, so you replenish those carbohydrates quickly. Okay, next question. If I didn't give you enough examples, Nicole, let me know and I can give you some more. So what is gut rot? Okay, so what gut rot is, as I talked about, there's a limit to how many carbohydrates we can absorb at a given time. And if you take in a concentrated form of carbohydrates, and when I say concentrated, I'm saying there's a lot of carbohydrates in a small serving, that creates a concentration gradient between the carbohydrates in your blood and the carbohydrates in your gut. And water travels from a concentration gradient of not very concentrated to more concentrated. And so if you have something concentrated in your gut, water actually flows from your body into your gut and causes digestive tract issues. This is actually the same exact way that laxatives work. And so taking in too much sugar at once creates this concentration gradient, and it makes you run to the bathroom, and it also effectively dehydrates you. So having too much sugar all at once with not enough water creates that issue. And I'm sure many of you have experienced that during your runs. I know I definitely have. So that's pretty general explanation of gut rot. Will the slide presentation and Zoom recording be available offline? Yeah, I can make this to a PDF and send it to Vacation Races, and they can distribute it. And I believe this is being recorded. So Facebook, I think you can see Facebook Lives after they're done, and you can watch the recording. But we'll definitely get the PDF out to everyone. Thanks so much. Caffeine thoughts. I live for goo. No offense, no worries. I will definitely give them a shot. I've never heard of Gnarly. Okay, how do you feel about caffeine during? So I think that's really dependent on the individual and your experience with caffeine. I personally am the same way. I like small amounts while I'm running. I feel like it makes a difference. Trevor, do you want to give your experience with that, caffeine versus not?
Yeah, I think it's definitely helpful. I tend to consume so much caffeine on a regular basis throughout my day anyways, that I don't know that I've had many negative effects from adding it to the race. I feel like if it's something you don't do often and it's not a part of your regular diet, I would definitely limit it. But it does provide a little energy boost, especially if you're late in an ultra marathon or something. So
yeah, a long time ago, I did my own personal experiment where I was actually, Leanne, using goo as well. So there's no offense taken. Like they make great products too, and I was curious, and so I tried a long run with the caffeine-free goos versus how I felt normally when I use the goos with caffeine, and it made a difference for me. I mean, most of the research shows that where caffeine comes into play is with something called perceived exertion, which is how hard you think you're working. And so I think including just a little bit can really help with mindset during those longer races. So if you want to try Fuel 2.0, just an FYI for those, we'll have 2 caffeine-free flavors, and the caffeine-free limeade is what is on Vacation Races courses. And then we have a caffeinated flavor, cherry cola, which is pretty amazing as well, that has 30 milligrams of caffeine from green tea extract per serving.
it's my favorite too.
Okay, so can you comment on how you might change your nutrition plan if you're training for and running long distances, but also still working on weight loss? If I want to refuel appropriately, but still have to add a caloric deficit. Yeah, Courtney, this is a great question, because you're kind of in this place where it's hard to perform at your top level if you're in a caloric deficit. And there's nothing wrong with working on weight loss. That can be an important goal for people as well. But you just have to be easy with yourself in this space and realize that if you are in a caloric deficit, your performance is always going to kind of be a little lower than it would be if you were giving yourself enough calories. So, I think you'd have to decide which is the priority for you. If the priority is performance, then I would focus on getting strong and think about getting strong as opposed to losing weight. If the priority is really on weight loss, then I wouldn't skimp on the calories before, during, or after you're running. I'd create that caloric deficit potentially in your other meals, but really make sure you're giving your body what it needs for that run, and giving your body what it needs to recover from that run. Trevor, do you have anything else you'd add to that?
Yeah, not so much from personal experience, but I do have a friend who's kind of in the same boat. He's really striving to become a top competitive ultra runner, but he's also at the same time trying to lose weight. So he's been like off and on this battle with trying to prioritize which one he wants to do. And I think that's what it is. I think you have to prioritize which is going to be more beneficial at any given time. I think you can do both, but it seems in his case he had to, in order for his performance to get better, he definitely had to start consuming more calories and really focus on that. So it can be a tricky balance.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay, I hope that helps, Courtney. Okay. My question is, if you're both eating and drinking on a long run, how can you estimate how many calories, carbs you're getting in without doing hella math on the go? It's a great question, Carrie. So what I've seen, I'll let Trevor kind of answer, what he does. But what I've done and what I've seen a lot of people do is kind of create these calorie packs. So for ultra runs, where they know, like, in this bag is 100 calories. And so then when they stop at a drop station, or their crew is refilling their pack, they know, like, okay, I'm taking 2 of these, and I have, in my water bottles, I'm full of Fuel 2.0. And so during this next section, I need to eat 2 100 calorie packs, and I need to drink both my water bottles. So I think, getting as close as possible is a great idea, but having it be perfect math is by no means required. But I think it's important to make sure you're getting kind of a minimum level, particularly in these ultra races. Trevor, do you have anything that you do specifically that helps with that?
Yeah, I'm definitely terrible at complicated math while I'm trying to run in a race. I would say for me, it's just good to go into it having a good idea about how many calories everything I'm going to consume is, and just sort of trying to keep track the best I can. But ultimately, I usually just end up going by feel. I don't think there's an exact science to how many calories you need to take in per hour. Obviously, there's going to be a certain level that you don't want to hit. Otherwise, your body's not really absorbing it, and you just end up with, diarrhea or whatever. But I think that if you're just going by feel and just kind of eating by hunger, I tend to go pretty minimal and stay on the lower side of what calories I could potentially consume. That's just me. I'm usually, trying to move as fast as I can, and can't really do it with a belly full of quesadillas or anything like that. So for me, it's all about feel, and it helps to practice on your long runs for sure, because then you can kind of get an idea of what all those calories mean to your body while you're actually running, like in practice, and not just doing it on the fly at a race. So
yeah, totally. This is a great question here. Roxana, you're my hero. So she's been having an issue with cramping during her past 6 marathons, something she's never suffered from. She's added more salt in her diet. She's 75 years old, and she ran her 376th marathon ultra last Sunday, and again was cramping. Fortunately, it started at mile 25. I was taking salt tabs. And so she's wondering what to do. So cramping is a tough one. It can be caused by a number of things. Electrolytes can definitely play a role, but it sounds like you're meeting your electrolyte needs through diet and through supplementation. Without knowing exact amounts, you could be a little low, but I'm not sure. As long as you're in the range that I kind of gave in my talk, like if you're hitting around 500 milligrams per hour, you should be pretty good. But there's also some research that cramping can be caused by basically neurological short circuits. And that's where things like, if you've ever heard of the product Hot Shot, or sometimes pickle juice can do it as well, or just really strong smelling substances can help break you out of that neurological short circuit and can help stop that cramping. So that would be the only other consideration that I would recommend is maybe trying a product like that, and it might help. Trevor, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I have had that issue many times, and it does seem like it happens while I'm taking the best care of myself and getting all the electrolytes I need. So again, I'm not entirely sure what's causing it, but I have used Hot Shot and I have used pickle juice. I think they both work. Hot Shot seems to work a little better. It also tastes like a very spicy Christmas, and can kind of make you want to vomit if you I don't know, take it down too fast. It's pretty gnarly stuff, but it works. I've had the worst cramps at Hurt 100, which is, if you don't know what race that is, it's in Hawaii, and it's like 90 degrees, 90% humidity. And so you're just super hot, sweating the whole time. And I've had really bad cramps there, and Hot Shot has eliminated them like immediately. So I think that product works exactly as advertised.
Awesome. Good to know. Maggie's wondering when Fuel 2.0 will be available. So it'll be available next week. So go to GoGnarly.com. We're selling boxes of the stick packs starting next week, and then the bags will be a little more into June. So we'll be selling 25 serving bags. You can do a pre-sale, or you can just wait until we release the bags in June, but we'll have all 3 flavors, the limeade, the tropical, and then the caffeinated cherry cola, in boxes of 10 stick packs for sale next week. How about BCAA supplements during a race? What do you recommend? Yeah, so Dan, this is where the Fuel 2.0 comes in, because it has HMB, which is a metabolite of the branched chain amino acid leucine in it. And so if you try Fuel 2.0 and you like it, you're hitting that BCAA supplement. I've had gnarly athletes that do long runs take in just a BCAA powder added in their water during the run. The concern there is just making sure that you're still getting those electrolytes in, so you're not switching out BCAAs for electrolytes. So, you know, you could do that. You could also look at BCAA tabs, but really an effective dose of BCAAs is going to be at least like 1.75 grams of leucine. So if you're using a capsule or a tab, just make sure you're getting in that much. Often products that like, I won't say any names, but products that incorporate BCAAs into their gels don't hit that amount, and you're not necessarily getting the efficacy unless you use something like HMB with those smaller levels. So I hope that helps. Did you talk about the week of race nutrition? Great question, Betsy. I didn't. So I'll give my answer, and then we can hear what Trevor does. So I don't think you should do anything different than you normally do. Most of the research on carb loading is very specific. So with carb loading helping a specific run, you almost have to go into carbohydrate depletion and then carbohydrate load right after. And the runs that they did the test in were very kind of specific, tightly controlled races. So I don't think carb loading works the way most people think it does for most of your races, or for most of the races that we would participate in. I will say that simply by doing a taper, so by cutting down the amount of running that you are doing the week before and keeping your nutrition the same, you are effectively carbohydrate loading without having to try. So I would just continue eating the way you always have. Do a good taper. You might be in the taper tantrums, but you know, stick with it and make sure that you're hydrated that whole week and getting lots of sleep. That would be my recommendation. Trevor?
Yeah, I would say basically the same thing. Keep everything mostly the same. I do sort of pseudo carbo load, but it's more just like rewarding myself for a big training block. So I'll just eat like more pancakes and stuff for breakfast. But I know it doesn't really do anything. The main thing I would suggest is in the last couple days before your race is just start eliminating some things that may be part of your regular diet, like cruciferous vegetables or like onions, a lot of like whole grains and stuff, things that are like going to potentially cause a lot of gas or GI distress and stuff. I try to do that, and it seems to help me. But otherwise, I like Shannon said, I taper and basically keep my calorie intake the same, keep my diet the same. So.
Awesome, Trevor. And then on the recording in the email, I'm not 100% sure. Vacation Races can maybe pop in and let us know. But I'll definitely get a PDF of the presentation for them to circulate. Thoughts on caffeine before and or during run, any effect on performance? So we talked about perceived exertion. I love caffeine before I run to clear my system out. So I can visit the bathroom before and not during my run. Trevor, what about you?
Sorry, muted. Yeah, same thing. I like to drink coffee just so I can use the bathroom a couple times before we get started. I drink coffee every day, so I don't know if coffee before really affects the way I race. So.
Okay, this is a great question. Can you talk about the differences in using BCAAs pre-run and EAAs as supplements? Okay, so EAAs are essential amino acids. They are the amino acids that it's essential we get from our diet, meaning that our body can't synthesize them. Branched chain amino acids are a subgroup of essential amino acids. And so you can get supplements that are just BCAAs, which is what we have in our Gnarly line. And then there are some companies that offer essential amino acids that have BCAAs in them as well. So I recommend BCAAs pre-run because most of the research shows that it's leucine, which is one of the BCAAs in particular, that helps prevent muscle protein breakdown. I haven't seen as much research with a whole essential amino acid supplement, although that would still be true as long as you were getting the appropriate amount of leucine in your essential amino acid supplement. And so, like I said, you want to get at least 1.75 grams to 2 grams of leucine. So as long as there's that much leucine in your EAA supplement, you're good to go. Post run, you really want either a whole protein, which is what we recommend, that has the full essential amino acid profile, or in a pinch, an essential amino acid supplement would be good as well. So BCAAs post run are not ideal, because although BCAAs kind of turn on the light switch for muscle protein synthesis, you need all of those other essential amino acids to actually rebuild muscle. So there's some research showing that in cases where you don't get in enough protein, supplementing with BCAAs can make up for that. But ideally, you really want whole protein, or maybe even an essential amino acid supplement post-run. BCAAs, more research for pre or during the run. So I hope that helps. So Leanne, she was worried about the caffeine in terms of the effects on heart rate. So I think it's how much caffeine you're taking and what your tolerance is, Leanne. So she called herself a caffeine junkie. So I don't know how much you're taking in. A lot of athletes that we work with love to use our pre-workout before they run, and that has 180 milligrams of caffeine, and it doesn't necessarily jack up your heart rate, but it gives you a huge boost of energy. I think anything in the 200 to 300 range in a single serving might be something that you would worry about with heart rate. But most products that you were using, like your goo that you mentioned you liked before, have much less than that. And so I'm not sure that it would be a problem, but once again, really depends on your tolerance and how much you take in. Trevor, have you ever used any highly caffeinated products before or during runs?
I would say probably the most highly caffeinated would either just be drinking way too much coffee in the morning before I run, or the pre-workout, like you said. The pre-workout does tend to make me feel a little jittery, but then if I get like a half mile into a run, it also balances out. So yeah, I don't know. I'm a caffeine junkie too, and I feel like my tolerance is so high that I don't know that it affects me too bad.
I keep forgetting I'm on mute. Okay, so if you fall behind on your fueling during a long run for whatever reason, do you eat more in the next hour to catch up, or just get back on track? I would recommend getting back on track if you can increase your calories slightly without sending you into like gut distress. That would be ideal, but you can definitely eat too much and it can shut down your stomach or cause you to throw up and get nauseous. So I think trying to double your caloric intake or anything like that is a dangerous thing to do. Trevor, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think going overboard with the food is usually a mistake, but you can also just slow down a little bit. I think that helps, and you might have to if you're really behind. You might be slowing down anyways, but I think slowing down and a slight increase in calories usually will get you back on track pretty well. I just wouldn't go overboard and try to mow down a pizza or anything, because that's not going to bode well.
Yeah, good call on the slow down. Unless you're Ben Light, right, who eats cheeseburgers or used to. Okay, so due to health reasons, I can't do cane sugar. Do you have any suggestions for electrolytes that don't have cane sugar or fake sugars? What about untapped maple? Trevor, you've worked with them before. That's, yeah. I mean, that I don't know if that classifies as cane sugar, Tiffany, for you, because it's maple sugar. That might be something to try. And I think because of the natural minerals that occur in maple syrup, it might hit both of those needs.
I've done races on just maple syrup out of a flask and water, and it seems to work pretty well. But like you said, I don't know what the difference between that and cane sugar would be if it hits the same.
Yeah, it's going to be this. Yeah, there are a lot of similarities there. So I'd have to know a little bit, I think, Tiffany, about the health reasons to make a better recommendation. But there's also products that are more food-based, like Spring Energy or Muir, that make like food, almost like baby food packets, that, that could be an option. And then just focusing on getting your calories from food, and then your hydration and electrolytes from liquid. Okay, what would be good approach for limiting muscle breakdown for fuel during long runs? Protein, carbs, pre, during, post-run ratio, BCAA mixed with electrolytes during the run. Okay, Lucy, I think I kind of covered this already. The Fuel 2.0 has HMB in it, which helps with that breakdown during long runs. You could also do BCAAs before. Watch the protein beforehand. Just make sure you're not getting too much too close to your run, because it can lead to digestive issues. If you have BCAAs during your run, yes, mix them with electrolytes. That would be a great option too. Would unflavored collagen powder be a good source of BCAAs? No. Collagen is relatively low in BCAAs. It's also really low in essential amino acids. Collagen powder is good for promoting collagen synthesis in your musculoskeletal tissues. So it can be great for helping with joint pain. It can be great for helping you recover from an injury, but it is not a great protein for recovery, and it's not a great protein for muscle synthesis. Oh yeah, I'm glad you liked it, Nancy, and I also am a vote for the coffee. Post-run, I've heard the egg white based protein is absorbed quicker than whey vegan based protein. I recently have been using egg white powder protein after long or back-to-back runs. Personally had a positive result. Yeah, egg protein can be great. I'm not sure that it's better than whey, to be honest. Whey has probably the highest, it's called the PCAAS score, which is how proteins are evaluated. It takes into account digestive efficiency, it takes into account essential amino acid content, and it takes into account leucine content. And whey is kind of the gold standard for protein. So I would guess that egg white protein is probably better than plant-based proteins. Although there are things like soy and pea protein are great plant-based protein options. And it may be better than whey. From my reading, it isn't, but they're both great options. I don't think you're, going wrong with either of them. And you're welcome, Roxana. Okay, so I think those are all the questions in there. I know we had some, Trevor, if you need to go, just let me know. Because we have a bunch in here.
I'm fine for right now. I'm good.
Okay. So could you give examples of foods, protein, carbs to eat pre and post run? So I gave some already. Trevor, did you have any others that you wanted to add to that you like to eat, at least from the vegan perspective?
Sorry, foods pre, post.
Pre and post run. Yeah. So you did do your bagel, right?
That's usually races. Most days I'll do oatmeal with some berries and bananas. Maple syrup in there, things like that. That's kind of my daily breakfast, honestly. And sorry, it's really loud. It got really loud here all of a sudden. And as far as mid-run stuff goes, I really like to experiment, just kind of have fun with it. Like I'll eat leftover pancakes or peanut butter filled pretzels or whatever energy bar I have in my closet, Pop-Tart, like something like if my kid didn't finish a Pop-Tart, I'll throw that in my pocket or something. So I think it's more fun, especially to break up like if you're going to be out for 6 hours, to, run for 2 hours and then be like, oh man, I got a Pop-Tart in my pocket. So I don't know.
Life just got a little better.
Yeah, exactly. And then afterwards is, really, I think anything goes. I feel like I can eat just about anything after a run. I really like to do pizza and beer, things like that. But for me, it's usually just trying to eat a big but sensible meal, about an hour or two after whatever run I'm doing. So
awesome. Yeah, and Trevor has said this before, and I think it makes a ton of sense. I'd never thought about it in terms of this. I'd always been like, know exactly what your body needs and likes and wants, but often in races, sometimes you're things are thrown at you, or they might be out of the thing that you usually eat, or maybe you missed a drop bag or something like that. And so surprising yourself every once in a while and getting your body used to different foods makes sense as well. And I had never thought about it that way. Fuel 2.0, we already talked about. Next week online. And if you love it and you want your local store to carry it, tell them to reach out to Gnarly at contact@gonarly.com, and we will happily provide them product to sell. We did the BCAAs and EAAs. How many ounces of water, electrolytes an hour should I drink for a 100-miler and longer? I weigh 130 and don't sweat that much unless it's very hot. So Jorge, I think that really depends, especially where your race is. I would recommend, as far as water, doing the sweat rate test that we talked about to get an idea. Sweat rates can vary greatly between people. You might know if you're a heavy sweater. I personally do, but getting a better idea of how much to shoot for is ideal. And then electrolytes, I always recommend people start is for a 100-miler or so in the 300 to 500 milligrams per hour range. Trevor, what do you usually do as far as fluids and electrolytes during your longer races?
A lot of it is just by feel. I've honestly struggled with trying to find the best balance, or being super disciplined in getting what I actually need. That's one reason I do think the Fuel 2.0 has been such a boost to my performance, is because it's giving me what I need just naturally. So if I'm just focusing on drinking to thirst with that, I'm usually getting enough sodium, magnesium, potassium, all that stuff, as well as enough liquid and calories. And then I just supplement the calories a little bit. If it's cold outside and I'm not drinking as much, then I just eat a little more to make up for the lack of calories. But
yeah, awesome. Okay, we talked about where gonarly.com, or tell your local stores to reach out. For triathlete, does the same apply? Yeah, so Joy, I in a previous life did Ironman, and I use the same exact principles. It's obviously a little different going from the bike to the run. On the bike, because you're not you don't get as much, for lack of a better term, jiggling or up and down motion. You're actually able to take in maybe slightly more calories and more solids. And so I would really focus on trying to get in the calories that you can on the bike, where it's easier to eat, because then when you do the run, the likelihood of an upset stomach is slightly greater because of that jiggling, and you'll be starting the run in a good place if you're not glycogen depleted after fueling on the bike. So I hope that helps. Okay, and then vacation races, they will email a link to the video and the slides to everyone who is registered, and then they put the link for registration. I'm just making sure I got all of these questions. Yeah, so just a FYI, Trevor and I are going to be doing this again 3 other times, on July 28th, on September 22nd, and on December 1st. So I'm essentially going to be covering the same information, but some good feedback would be if there are more things that you want to see, I can always add to it, and it'll give Trevor an idea of kind of other topics to cover that we could add on. The purpose of these is to really just cover the basics, and for those that missed it or want to see it again and ask other questions, then they could jump on there. HMB, Joy, is hydroxymethylbutyrate. It's a metabolite of the branched chain amino acid leucine. So consuming it, you get the exact same benefits that you do with having BCAAs in your system while you're exercising, but you don't have to take in as much. Okay, awesome. Tiffany found Spring Energy. Good. I'm glad. I hope those work for you. If using Gnarly regular fuel version on a long run, do you recommend drinking plain water also? Jody, I think that's a great question. Often, I think on longer runs, people can get taste fatigue. So personally, once again, I've said it a million times, it's very individual, but I usually bring a water and then I bring a Fuel 2.0 and switch off between the two, because I don't want, you know, if I get taste fatigue and I don't feel like drinking something flavored anymore, I want to keep hydrating. So I still have water as an option. Trevor, do you ever do that, or?
Yeah, now a lawnmower is going by, so it's even louder. Yeah, I do the same, and oftentimes if I'm just running from my house and you know, all I want to bring is one bottle, I'll bring like an empty bottle with a filter cap on it, so I can just drink regular water out of the stream if I feel like it, and that kind of helps. At races, sometimes I'll carry a bottle of each, depending on how long in between aid stations. I've found personally that I don't get flavor fatigue from this product. I've been able to drink it all day without an issue. Sometimes like mile 80 or so, water sounds good, but I'm still able to drink the Fuel 2.0 as well on top of it. So
Awesome. All right, I think, oh wait, got another question here. I'm running the Yellowstone half and have not been able to run a lot due to some bulging discs. I'm sorry to hear that, Becky. But I've been back to 4 miles every other day recently. Do you think I will have a problem finishing the race? I'm gonna let Trevor take that one.
sorry, can you give me the gist of the question
Yeah,
again?
so
was distracted.
was it the lawnmower or the jet?
Yeah, both.
So running the Yellowstone half marathon, and she hasn't been able to run a ton due to some bulging discs in her back, but she's recently back to 4 miles every other day. Do you think I will have a problem finishing the race?
No, I don't think you'll have a problem finishing. I think it's, you know, it's always good to temper your expectations a little bit and where you think you might finish, and just be super patient with yourself and cheer yourself on for how great you're doing, you know, despite the circumstances. But a half marathon, I see no reason why you wouldn't be able to finish that. So good luck, and I hope you crush it.
Yeah, same, Becky. Might consider doing the run walk thing. So, you know, maybe running for a couple miles and then walking a mile and then running for a couple miles and walking a mile, or some like elaboration of that, just to make sure in those later miles that you're feeling better and not kind of putting all your effort into those early miles and then, you know, having pain later on. But I agree. I think tempering expectations and looking at how far you've come despite a pretty painful back issue. Yeah. All right. I think that's it. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for all the great questions. And Trevor, thanks so much for joining and yeah, sharing your experiences.
No problem.
All right. Awesome, guys. Well, we'll see you at the next one.
Thanks, Shannon.
Bye, guys.
See you.